So it's getting towards the spooky season, and we're going to be talking about a couple of things that, again, authors like to do to stop themselves with the input of Gwendolyn Kiste, author of Reluctant Immortals, here on I Should Be Writing, Season 18, Episode 58.
Well, I should be writing. I should be working on my craft. I should be writing. I should be submitting my next draft. But I'm sitting home watching Doctor Who.
So, hi there. Welcome to I Should Be Writing. This is the podcast for wannabe fiction writers. I'm your host, Mer Lafferty. Been doing this podcast since 2005. I've been a traditionally published writer since 2013. And I'm still talking about imposter syndrome and stuff because it's still relevant in my life, at least. So that's why I'm doing this here. I am working on, I'm taking a comedy script writing class right now, and so most of my work this week has been doing homework for the class. So I'm doing a lot of pre-writing, a lot of brainstorming and character design and stuff. And since I don't do a lot of character stuff that I feel, I'm having a lot of fun with it. So that's pretty much what I've been up to. I have with me today, I probably should introduce you first before I went into that, but, you know, I can pretend I'm new at this. I have Gwendolyn Kiste, author of Reluctant Immortals, newly out from Saga, and it is a gorgeous cover. It is a awesome book, and very happy to have you here, Gwendolyn. How are you?
Just fine. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. This is you can explain it. It's I call it historical horror. Is that correct, or is it literary?
Oh, yeah.
Historical horror? Well, I mean, it's not. You're not going off history. You're going off literature.
Yeah. I suppose it could be. I suppose it could be both. It's both. So it's set in the 1960s and the Summer of Love in 1967. So it is historical. It is horror, and then
yeah.
It is also literary. So yeah, it's the story of two forgotten female characters from Gothic literature, Lucy Westenra from Dracula and Bertha Antoinetta Mason from Jane Eyre, and they are the reluctant immortals of the title and still dealing with the toxic men from their past, so Dracula and Edward Rochester.
Yeah, I have so many questions. I can't wait to dig into this, but we'll get to do you have anything you want to talk about you're working on? Because I like to invite the guests to answer the questions that I'm asking myself.
Yeah, I love how you brought up that right now you're just brainstorming for projects. That's really where I am. And I sometimes tell myself that's not enough writing, but it is totally enough writing. And a lot of times I do this thing of like, oh, I'm not doing enough. But it's like when I finally get to a project, if I've spent that time brainstorming it, it always goes a lot better than if I don't spend that time doing that. So it's like that's kind of where I am with working on a nonfiction article and then a short story. So, trying to just in that brainstorming phase, which is a fun phase because usually there's less pressure to have to do something, a certain word count or anything like that. So
yeah.
It's a nice phase, even if I don't count it as writing, but I should.
And if you're going off in the wrong direction, it's not that hard to fix it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's get to good news. My good news is a little fiddly. We had to have the dog had major knee surgery this month, and we had to get a new air conditioning unit for our house. And but I did get some book money, and I did get some pet health insurance will be covering 80% of the surgery. So what we thought would be a horrifically expensive month is only kind of expensive. So it's a lot better to go in that direction. So I'm very happy. And I endorse pet insurance for anybody who has a pet because those knee surgeries ain't cheap. But if you guys have any good news to put in the chat, or if you have good news and you're listening to this later, feel free to email me and tell me your good news and I'll talk about it on the next episode. And remember that rejections are good news because they mean you're a working writer. because non-working writers don't get rejected, and working writers do. Trust me. While we're waiting for chat to see if they have anything for us, Gwendolyn, do you have any good news you want to share?
Yeah, I'm sure something. Let me think of something. Gotta fill out a contract for a short story. They submitted. It was an invite to an anthology, and they liked it. And now I'm just gotta read over all the legalese and send it on back. So yeah, that's always good. That's always a good place to be.
Yeah, that's great. That's great news. My good news is the placeholder page for my next book is up. It has no info and no cover yet.
It'll get there. That's like, that's such an exciting part.
Yes, still. Any title? Kids Are Asleep? Is this the book you've been holding close to your chest? If you don't know, The Kids Are Asleep is Valerie Valdez, author of Fault Tolerance, that just came out. So we'll be eagerly looking for her next book. It's called Where Peace is Lost. Planetary romance coming soon. Awesome.
Yeah.
We are looking forward to that. Wait, where's the yay button? I have not set up the yay button perfectly on the interview page because I remember this. Okay, there we go. Yay. All right, I remember somebody else said they had a rejection to report on Tuesday, but if you're not in the chat right now, you can tell me later. And we'll give you guys a couple more seconds to give me any good news you may have. I'm surprised. Usually there's more good news coming through. Oh, but hey, I hope everything's at least status quo for folks if you don't have any good news to report.
That's true. Sometimes status quo is good news on its own. At least it's not backwards movement.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. Well, with the Gwendolyn part anyway. I was excited to get this book. First, it's got a gorgeous cover. If you're listening to this later, it's got it's from the Summer of Love. It's got a psychedelic purple and blue and a little bit of yellow. Yeah. Fluorescent yellow. That's the word I'm looking for. Good Lord. Fluorescent yellow cover. It's really, really nice. And yeah, tell us about it, because tell us where. Sorry. This is what Summer has to cut out later, so this is why I'm glad I have a producer. So yeah, you gave us the rundown of the novel. I want to know this. I have to show my ignorance here, and I'm a little embarrassed. I've never been into Gothic stuff, and I've tried a lot. So Jane Eyre, while a very, very, very famous novel that I know everyone else has read, is not one I'm familiar with. But a lot of people write about Dracula. But what made you go to Jane Eyre for your other forgotten woman of Gothic literature?
To me, what was interesting is I often thought about Lucy and Bertha very similarly, that they're both these, very vivacious socialites in the original material. And then throughout the course of the book, or what happens before the book, in the case of Jane Eyre, it's like they really, kind of had that life force sort of sucked out of them, and in Jane Eyre, it's not necessarily supernatural. There's hints of supernatural things in Jane Eyre, but it never outwardly, is supernatural. But at the same time, both of them meet very untimely ends in their respective novels. And they both just seem like, characters that had a lot more to say than we ever necessarily got to hear from them. And so it was just, somebody mentioned the short story that I wrote about Lucy. That was the, kind of the springboard for this book. And, I realized I really wanted to expand upon it. And then my thought was I didn't necessarily want it to just be a Dracula retelling or a Dracula sequel. I really liked the idea of kind of putting her together with another character, and right away, Bertha from Jane Eyre came to mind, the mad woman in the attic, and really saying that, I wanted both of them to kind of have their perspective represented in a way that usually hasn't been in different literature or even the film adaptations. There's a lot of film adaptations of both Dracula and Jane Eyre. So there's been a lot of, opportunities, but we haven't gotten as much from either one of these characters. And it was just very much something that, I wanted to explore.
That's excellent. Why 1969?
1967.
Excuse me.
I always thought growing up that the Summer of Love was 1969 because we associate it with like Woodstock, and it's like, but it was 67.
I think it's Bryan Adams' fault too.
What was that?
I think it's Bryan Adams' fault too. Didn't he sing Summer of 69?
Yes.
Okay.
It's true.
I'm going to blame him.
Yeah, we'll blame him. That's a good idea. I like that.
So anyway, why 67?
I was always fascinated by the Summer of Love. And I think the fact that I actually made that mistake for so long of thinking it was 1969. And then when I was younger and researching the 60s, just because I found it so interesting. And I was like, okay, so this, what was it about 1967? And it was this turning point in a lot of ways, socially and culturally, and even some politically. And I've thought about it a lot over the years. I visited the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco, and I just kept going back to it, and I thought it was such a tumultuous time. And these characters, I knew I wanted to write about this kind of breaking point for them, and this point where, things changed for them. And it seemed to be like an interesting kind of symmetry of this was a time when America really changed, and then to have things also really change for these characters. And I also just love California, and I think California can be a very Gothic setting. It usually isn't treated as a Gothic setting, but it very much can be. And so, the book takes place both in Hollywood and then in San Francisco. And both of those have like their Gothic elements. And so it's just really fun to kind of explore those in that era.
Yeah, so I want you, I was going to ask you to read like the first, at least the first sentence, maybe the first paragraph, because, I don't think we cover hooks well enough on this show, and yours has an amazing hook. So give us what that is.
Yes, I will write. Maybe read most of the first page. It's almost sundown in Los Angeles, and Dracula's ashes won't shut up. He's been at it since yesterday, calling out for me, calling out for anyone, his voice strained and distant, so soft I can never quite make out the words, so unforgiving I can never escape him. I cover my ears and recite a prayer I no longer believe, but it's not enough to blot out the sound of him. I have to try something else. I have to bury him. Again. So now here I am, standing in the shadow of the Hollywood sign, a shovel in one hand, an urn of his ashes in the other. Up here on Mount Lee is as good a place as any to lay him to rest. It's remote and hard to get to, and at the very least, I won't forget where I put him.
Yeah, I think the best first sentences and first paragraphs have to give us at least like 3 or 4 questions that we need answered in the book. And one of my favorite things about this is how pervasive the threat is. It's like all the other, well, not all, I've not seen all the other sort of Gothic or vampire tales, but a lot of them say, okay, you struggle, you fight, and you either succumb or you defeat. And we're talking, this is almost like, I mean, you don't write it like this, but this could be a book 2, where book 1 was whatever she did to Dracula, and now we're in book 2. But we know we don't get a book 1. This is like, it starts with the ashes of this man that still haunts me, literally, and it's never going to be over because she can't get rid of him, literally. So that's just such a that's even more creepy than a lot of other retellings, because that feeling of it's never going to end is a really chilling one. Where did you come up with that angle?
One of the things I've been watching the Hammer adaptations ever since I was a kid, and anytime you need to make a sequel, there's always got to be a reason why it had to continue from the last time when they acted like, oh, it's gone, he's gone, we're good.
Yeah.
But then it seems like, it's never really gone. It's never really done because, these characters keep coming back. And some of it is just for sequels. But it also feels very realistic to me because unfortunately, societally, most of the problems we have now are the same problems we've always had, And even when we think we've gotten past something, it'll come back in a different way.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the day, it's still the same problem. So to me, it just feels like this is what life feels like. There's never any way. I mean, I think there could be ways. I think we just have to really commit to it. But, usually things just keep going and we just kind of go through cycles. And so to me, that was like one of the appealing things about writing this story from Lucy's perspective so many years later, that, she's still dealing with the same things that, we know of Dracula. And it's not necessarily, like you said, we don't come into this world and everything's fine and then Dracula shows up. It's like everything's, chaos even before. It's just chaos that she's managing the best that she can.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you are, I trying very carefully to ask this question because you are a noted horror writer, 3-time Stoker winner. You're not you're not a newbie at this, but still, going into the actual Dracula myth, it's got to take some courage because it has been done so often and retold and reimagined. And, early on, you make it to where it's not, oh, this is another tired Dracula trope. But what how is it just being a horror writer and that's like stuff you have your heritage you feel you have a right to, or are you just that bold?
For me, I actually feel like it's just, retellings are a big part of, I think literature in general, but definitely horror. I feel like a lot of us are working in certain tropes, vampires being a huge one. So it felt very natural because, like you said, I feel like we keep building almost like on it as though it's a form of folklore and that we're all just kind of contributing to it in its own way. So that was really how I went into it. And especially with the fact that there's not really many versions, if at all, from Lucy's perspective. And so it just really felt like, okay, this is something that hasn't been done. So, let's see where this can go and what I can do with this. And that would just be a fun book to write. I think that's always a nice thing when you're going into a book. You're like, I think this will be fun. I think that this won't make me miserable the whole time I'm writing it. Because I feel like at some point with every project, invariably you're angry at it or upset with it or don't like it. So I feel like if you go into it saying, I at least think this will be fun for parts of it, that's actually a good place to start.
Yeah. It's not a word I say on the podcast because I keep this one PG, but Connie Willis does have a phrase that when she knows she's done with the book is when it gets it's that book, that damn book, and then it goes further and further into worse words. So yeah. So Valerie Valdez in chat said something really interesting that I know you're probably going to want to go off of, which is feels like Dracula as mental illness allegory. So I know you have more of an allegory of violent partners, violent men and women trying to escape them. What gets me is you start it funny. It's just, she's frustrated and funny and trying to bury an urn that keeps talking to her. And then, you go pretty seamlessly into the stress they feel of the men that are pursuing them.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that?
Very carefully, I guess, trying my best to balance it carefully. I always feel like that when you're dealing with those kind of things, when you're kind of going back and forth between dark humor and really, heavy stuff, just hoping that you are respectful in doing it and respectful in writing things like that. But, one of the things I feel, and I feel like a lot of people may agree with this, but obviously not everybody, but I think when you have trauma, a lot of times humor is a way of dealing with it. I think that a lot of people have that experience. We don't talk about it a lot because I think that it almost seems like, oh, that's disrespectful. But I think people who have trauma, in their past, you deal with it a lot of times by figuring out ways of laughing at it, even if it's this kind of like, like I said, very dark humor about it, but kind of finding those places of calling out how the ways of making yourself feel better about it, and maybe not normalizing it, because I don't think in the book Lucy necessarily normalizes it, but these ways of being able to deal with it and to cope with it. So that was definitely something I was thinking about, because I do think she uses humor very much as a coping mechanism throughout the book, of being like, this, I'm going to point out how ridiculous this is. It's ridiculous that I have this guy who won't leave me alone, who's in this urn, who's, all these ridiculous things happening, but then also trying to deal with, how serious it is, and how afraid she is throughout the book.
Yeah. So on Tuesday, I was looking at a Zoom seminar thing from Patreon with a life coach, or actually more of a creative coach that they employ, and I was telling him, look, I know, we're talking about burnout, and I said, look, I know in my head that breaks are good and walks are good, but when I get like into heavy focus or heavy stress, I can't make myself do it. And I'm like, how do I get to that point? And he said, you've got to give yourself permission to. And that kind of blew my mind, because I talk about that a lot on the show, about, you've got to give yourself permission to write in the first place. You've got to give yourself permission to be bad, because you're only going to get better once you're bad. And so once you give yourself permission to write whatever's in your head, no matter how terrible it is, that's how you grow as a writer. But I had not thought about that as like a self-care thing. And since I kind of wanted to talk about that on this episode, and you're an accomplished writer and here with me, I was curious where you stood on the idea of permission and everything.
Yeah, it's something that I know I struggle with, that it's like, like you said, really needing that time for a break, needing that time for basic self-care. Like you said, just taking a walk, I do yoga, and like, there's a lot of times that I'll be like, oh, I don't have time to take a walk today. I don't have time to do yoga today. I don't have time to do these basic things that are just basic self-care, or I'll keep myself up way too late working, and then, don't maybe not even sleep in, and so only get like 6-7 hours of sleep or less. And it's like, I'm an 8-hour a night sleep person. Like if I get less than that, I don't do as well. I can do it, but I'm not, as sharp the next day, but still like being like, no, I need to keep working. And so I really like that about just consciously giving yourself not only permission to write, but then also permission not to write, of being able to understand that, plus, a lot of times, some of my best ideas I've ever had actually have come from when I'm taking a walk or doing something else.
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
a lot of times will give myself the time or the permission to do that, even though honestly, like my work actually doesn't suffer from taking the time off. It actually benefits from it. But logically, I'm trying to still convince myself I need to work all the time, rather than being like, sometimes those breaks actually help with the work and you're actually more efficient. Even though that's not a great way of looking at it anyways, because that's still prioritizing the work over prioritizing self-care. But sometimes that helps me, at least, being like, just take a little bit of time off. It's not a bad thing. It can help.
Well, for me, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like being reminded of why I'm doing this, because I love doing this. Like the coming up with the solutions to a sticky plot problem. That's fun. That's like a dopamine hit. And even if it is technically working, it still feels like the fun part of it. And so I agree that it shouldn't be framed that way, but I still think it's more beneficial to, allow yourself to enjoy that as well, if you do solve things or come up with a good idea. But it's like what you said earlier with how brainstorming didn't make you feel like you were working. And right now I've got a book coming up in 11 days, and I'm kind of in high promo mode. And I keep thinking I didn't get any writing done today because I did a whole bunch of blog posts. And I got to remember that also is work. That is work for the book that's already technically done, but it's still work. And I got to give myself permission to not maybe put words down on the page, as long as I'm supporting the career that I'm trying to build. So,
That was something that when Reluctant Immortals came out last month, I actually told myself, I had to condition myself for like 2 or 3 months in advance to give myself permission not to be doing any maybe new writing, but as I was promoting it the first couple of weeks, because I knew that I'd be really busy with that. And so like I told myself over and over again of like, you're probably not going to get any writing done because you're working in a different way. And it actually did make it so, the first couple of weeks of promotion for this were a lot more enjoyable because I wasn't beating myself up over not doing other work. It's like, this is work. You're out talking about the book. Like you said, you're doing posts about the book. You're doing different things. That counts as work as a writer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'll ask you, what are you reading right now?
Oh, what am I reading right now? I'm actually not even sure. Like I have like a whole bunch of books on my nightstand, but I don't even know. I have one that I just finished, so I will show you that one. I actually got it right here. So.
Yeah, whenever somebody asks me that, I'm surrounded by books in this room. You can't tell because I got the green screen up, but and by surrounded, I don't mean like a pretty bookshelf. I mean, they're on the
Stacks.
bed, they're on the floor, they're on the wall. It's, stacks everywhere. So, it's, I whenever somebody asks me that, I think my mind goes blank. I'm like, books? I don't read. I don't know. And for some reason, it's just I have to pick up my Kindle or my phone to look at Audible or something.
Yep.
I don't know. Oh, thank you, Daniel. That's very sweet. We got a bunch of gift subs. Daniel's trying to save people from ads. Thank you, Daniel. That's awesome. And now we get my fun new Halloween emote 5 times. That's great. Thank you. I'm sorry. I just love the little Halloween emotes. They make me so happy. Actually, no, alerts. They're alerts. I've been doing this for a while. So yeah, in the recording, they're gonna get this like just little ghost sound 5 times in a row.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know if you're looking at the feed, at the stream or not, Gwendolyn, but
yeah, I'm looking at the stream. Like it's actually kind of freaking me out because our video is delayed.
Yeah.
And so like I keep like, kind of getting weirded out by
right. It. But the ghostly hand coming up to indicate people. But let's turn to the chat. If you guys have any questions to Gwendolyn, I want to ask you what advice you have for beginning writers, because most every writer I know if they don't suffer from doubt and imposter syndrome or something, they at least remember when they did. And so I was curious what you have to say to people to keep them going.
I think we've already touched on this, but just write what you believe in, write what, the stories that you want to read. I feel like that's the best advice I've ever gotten, is write the stories that, don't exist in the world, but that you would want to read. Because I think, again, like, those are the stories you're going to love the most. You're not writing them because you feel like, oh, this is what the publishing market wants right now, because you never know. That changes quickly anyway. So by the time you're done with something, even if that was what was popular, it may not be anymore. And I also think stories that people are really like just passionate about, they work better. And I think, and again, like you said, like, we're often irritated with our projects by the time they're done anyways, but at least if you start out really passionate about them, then it's at least, something that can help carry you through the very long process of writing the first draft, editing it, sending it off, getting edits back, rewriting it again.
Yeah.
There's a lot. So it's like, if you start and you really love it and you're really passionate about it and it's a story that you would want to read, I think it makes it so it's a lot easier, to get through all of those points and just to keep going with it. So that's like the best advice I've ever gotten, just write the stories you would want to read.
Excellent. I had another question and I looked at chat and then got distracted. Oh, Daniel has a question. I've heard authors mention they feel like they've grown or evolved as writers after each project. Do you feel like this is the case with Reluctant Immortals? If so, how did it affect your writing? And thank you for the follow, by the way.
Oh, okay. I like that. I feel, this was really very rooted in its time and place in 1967 California. So that was like really fun to see about, I'd done that in my first novel, The Rust Mains, which was in 1980 Ohio, but I'm from Ohio. And even though I wasn't born yet in 1980, I was close to it. I was born in the 80s. So that didn't feel like I was going somewhere that was so different from what I'd experienced. But I've never lived in California. I've spent time there, but never lived there. And I definitely didn't live in 1967. So one of the things that was really just fun about that is seeing how much being able to root in a time and place can really inform a story over such a long arc. I'd written some stories that took place in certain times and places, but never a full novel to this extent and somewhere that I'd never really been in that time frame. So that was a really fun experience of seeing that and, how that affected me as a writer. And this is my third novel, so I feel like with each one, just learning how to plot a novel. I feel like I've written a lot of short stories. I feel like I'm better at plotting short stories than I am novels. I feel like I'm still learning in a lot of ways, so it's just nice. Every one, I feel like I'm hopefully, like the question asked, getting better, hopefully. Like, that's always your hope as a writer. Not that you're going backwards, but I do think that, I'm getting more confident in just the ability to be able to write it and be able to kind of follow all the different threads of a plot along as it goes. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm always admiring people who write in in history, because I just have that feeling I would slip up and say something that doesn't exist yet. Like we had Lily Lainoff on, who was writing in the time of the Three Musketeers, trying to talk about things like chronic illness and LGBT issues where there are no words for in that time. And, when you started talking about the grandson coming back from Vietnam, and what you're saying is he's going to have PTSD, but you couldn't say he's going to have PTSD. Do you come across that, or do you just like not think that's an issue and just like blow right past it? Because that would feel like a wall to me. Like, oh, I don't even know if I can say that word. Is that word usable at this time?
Yeah. One of the things that's a really a good example from Reluctant Immortals, that there is a character who's just come back from Vietnam, and I was thinking that, I'm thinking he obviously has, there are signs of PTSD already, and yet I knew I couldn't use that term. They may have been able to use shell shock, I think is what they called it back then, but I decided not to do either one because I wasn't sure how much that was still being used. That tended to be used more in the World Wars, I think. And so I was like, I'm just going to show some examples of how he's reacting and let, the reader either catch that or not. And so I try to actually kind of like play, both sides of that and trying to think it through. What would people know then? What would they not know? Doing that research, but not letting it completely stop me, being like, if at some point I do something that isn't correct, I'll be disappointed. I will be, but like if it gets all the way through to publication and I don't catch it, but it's like I'm not gonna I don't want it to completely stop the creativity. So really trying to balance it, because there may be words that I use that I would think people would be using in the 1960s. I tried not to use too much slang unless I knew it was from that era. But is there a chance that I use a turn of phrase in there that maybe wasn't popular then? Possibly, but trying to be as cognizant of that as possible, but not letting it be something that I completely stop. Plus, the 1960s aren't so different than now. Like you said, something back in like the Three Musketeers time, that's a lot different.
Yeah.
So it's like that's a lot. It's a lot harder, I think.
More questions. Yeah, Tree Lobster says, I tend to write stuff I would want to read based on book sales. Very few people share my taste in fiction. I'm sorry, Tree Lobsters. Lee says, I'm just weirded out that my birth year would be considered historical, 1968. And Daniel says, is there a genre you haven't written in yet that you'd like to at some point?
Ooh. I don't know. I've written in I've written some sci-fi, I've written some fantasy, and then I've written obviously mostly horror. Nothing I can think of. Maybe someday something like horror western. I think that could be interesting because a lot of my work is set in America, and I do find, just American history fascinating, especially as a horror writer, because there's a lot of horror in American history. There's a lot of really scary things in American history. So, you know, possibly a Western at some point, but that's definitely not on the agenda yet. That would take a tremendous amount of research if I wanted to like set it in, you know, the 1800s and like have it be accurate. Though lots of Westerns aren't, like certainly the Western films I grew up watching, I think were really all that accurate.
Yeah, no kidding.
Maybe some of that accuracy is, you know, optional. I don't know.
Yeah. Jasmine asked, did you create a chart or list of things the creatures/vampires could do, Sparkle, Daywalker, and what the humans can do? Or do you do the basics and then change them as maybe needed while the book is written?
You know, some of both. I try to keep, you know, some notes and some lists of anything that I may forget. And then, of course, there are things I'm like, I'm sure I won't forget that. And then you go back in a second draft, you're like, oh, I forgot that. So trying to balance that. But, you know, also allowing the story to evolve kind of organically the first draft, at least, you know. I always think that, you know, that's what editing is for, going back if something, you know, if you discover something late in the story that you're like, this would have been so great if I would have thought of this earlier, but then just I always call it like just back building it in, just build it in afterwards, you know, once the first draft is done. So yeah, probably a little bit of both. I do try to keep at least some amount of notes. Although the person who like I think was like one of the editors on this had this great list, like actually sent this great list with all the information that they had done. And I was like, wow, they're way more organized than me. Like, well done. Like they had this whole like style sheet. And I was like really excited about it. I felt like I need to do a style sheet. I do not do a formal style sheet.
Yeah.
It was great. It was really nice. I was really excited about it.
Yeah. The publisher style sheets, they're amazing. And I do not know how people keep that in their heads. It's amazing. Yeah. I finally remember what I was going to ask earlier, talking about writing what you love. A lot of people have a problem with, especially like around when you hit the point where you don't like the story or you're pretty sure it's terrible, you often get a new idea because your brain's a jerk. And you think, well, clearly what I'm writing is crap. And this looks like a really good idea. I just tell people to write that down and go back to the crap because it's probably not crap. And you need to get the experience of starting and finishing a story. Because if you just know how to start a story really well, that no one cares. But do you have any thoughts about what to do when you do have a new idea that you love and you've already got a project that's not quite as shiny and sexy?
You know, for me, it all depends on the length of the project. Like if I'm writing a novel and I'm kind of at a not great point and I come up with a short story idea, I may take a break for like a few days, a week and a half to work on the short story because I've had time when I come back to the novel, I'm a lot better focused and I'm like, oh, okay, like you said, it's not as bad as I thought, because there's always a point where I think it's like way worse than it probably is.
Yeah.
You know, but if it's like a whole nother novel idea, yeah, I agree. Like write it down, put it somewhere. But unless you really honestly, like I've had novels that I've gotten, you know, pretty far into and kind of just like abandoned them because they weren't working. But that was not just because another project idea came. That was because they were just having a lot of structural issues and I didn't really know where they were going to quite the degree that I wanted to. So,
right.
You know, but yeah, I agree. If the project, if you believe in the project, you know, you can take a break from it, obviously, but, you know, maybe don't start a whole nother project. Although some people work on multiple novels at once. I don't know how they do it. If you're one of those people and that works for you, good for you. I'm not one of those people.
Right. Yeah. Me neither. I usually try to, you know, kind of stop people from. The reason why I don't recommend doing it is mainly because of, you know, it's people who haven't finished a book might allow themselves to be drawn away and not come back to what they were doing. But that's a really good point. Is if you tell yourself, you know, I will allow myself to research or look into this new project, but I have to come back to this one. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good compromise. I like it. I tried to put your URL in the chat and I messed it up. How am I calling you out, Christian Writing?
That's good. That's fine.
Okay.
Oh, I see what happened. I think it thinks it's a protected site. It is not a protected site, just a www.
Yeah, I took the S out, so.
Yeah, I don't know why. Like I've had that happen before, and I'm like, no, it's not a protected site.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't have the HTTPS.
Right.
There's nothing. I'm not asking for anybody to give me information. Please don't send me any information.
Yes. Oh, Christian Writing keeps getting distracted by shinier projects. Yeah. Yeah. That's it's a problem. I feel it too.
Yeah.
That's why I was glad I when I turned my other book in, I just decided to give myself the summer to just run after any weird shiny idea I got.
That's nice. That's such a nice place to be. That's always exciting when it's just like, I have time now. I can do whatever.
Yeah.
Have you been able to run after some nice shiny projects?
I think so. I've kind of done the thing where I feel like a lot of them are half-baked, and so I'll start writing and I'll be like, this doesn't feel right, and then I'll think about it, and a lot of times I discover that two very different ideas I have with some tweaking will go really well together and complement each other, and so I'm trying to like allow my brain to do that and not just... So yeah, I started something earlier this summer and I thought there's not enough there, and then I recently thought, but if I combine it with this other thing, that might be really interesting. So I need to be outlining that shortly. But this other thing I'm working on is the one I'm brainstorming and doing like outlines and character sketches on. That's pretty shiny. I'm excited about that. Frankenstein the story ideas. Yes, Shards.
Yes.
Oh yeah, Under Pope, sorry. Let's see if that works. It's supposed to work according to the bots, but the bots don't always like me. But anyway, I've kept you for about an hour now, so is there anything you wished I would have asked you or anything you want to talk about?
No, I'm good. I'm thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Oh,
And
good.
thank you to everybody who came live. This is exciting. Like it's really nice to have people like in the chat. Yay.
Yeah, it is really fun. It's I don't usually get a huge sorry. Okay, Underpope, I know you can do it now. I usually don't get like a huge audience in the live stream, but they're very engaged and they keep it going and keep it really interesting. So I very much appreciate the people who come by and help me out. Thank you, Jasmine, for posting the URL again. Goodness. So, for the benefit of the people listening later, tell us your URL and anywhere else online you would like us to find you.
Yeah, so my website is gwendolynKiste.com, and you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook just by Gwendolyn Kiste.
Yeah, and you can find me at merverse.com, and you can get Reluctant Immortals. It's out now, and you can get my book, Station Eternity. It's so pretty. Your book is so pretty. It's so pretty. I love the colors. And you can get my book, Station Eternity, out in a week and a half on October 4th. We'll be doing a live stream of I did an audio drama for the first couple of chapters. We're doing that live on October 1st, 7 p.m. Eastern. And then Sherry Priest and Chuck Wendig will be here on Ditch Diggers on the 3rd to do a sort of launch event, and then the book's out on the 4th, so I'm going to be busy those times. So yeah, Gwendolyn, thank you so much for your time and your awesome book and your awesome answers.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Excellent. And yeah, thank you guys very much. It was lovely. You guys asked good questions. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yeah, I guess that's it for me. Y'all take care. Have a good weekend. Actually, no, wait. I have to say, Ditch Diggers is going to be tomorrow at 4:30. I forgot. We rescheduled it. Ditch Diggers tomorrow at 4:30. Cameron Hurley and Margaret Dunlap. We're going to be talking Hollywood and money. So, you'll definitely want to come for that. But y'all take care. I Should Be Writing is available to you under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license. Theme music by John Anelio. Art by Numbers Ninja. Production by Summer Brooks. And hosting by Libsyn. Find all of this information and more at merverse.com. And remember, we can't do this without you. Thanks for your support.
I should be writing. I should be working on my craft. I should be writing. I should be submitting my next draft. But I'm sitting home watching Doctor Who. Yeah, I'm sitting home watching Doctor Who.